Welcome back to Bookworm. Today's book is about something many people don't immediately recognize as painful because it doesn't come from chaos or obvious harm. It comes from growing up emotionally alone. Many adults who relate to this book don't describe their childhood as bad. They describe it as fine, stable, normal. They had food, structure, rules, sometimes even affection. But emotionally, they learned early not to expect much. They learned not to ask, not to rely, not to need. Adult children of emotionally immature parents helped me understand why so many capable, self sufficient adults still feel disconnected in relationships, even when they want closeness. This book isn't about labeling parents as bad or uncaring. It's about emotional maturity, the ability to notice, respond to, and support a child's inner world. When that maturity is limited, children adapt quietly. They become independent too soon. They regulate themselves. They learn to keep emotions small so relationships stay manageable. That adaptation works until it doesn't. As adults, these children often feel responsible, composed, and competent on the outside. But inside, there's emotional distance, difficulty trusting others, a sense that relying on someone is uncomfortable or unsafe. If you've ever felt emotionally alone, even around family, hesitant to open up, or unsure how to receive support, this book may feel uncomfortably familiar. As you watch this video, I don't want you to analyze your parents or your past. Just notice what resonates. Before we continue, if you value calm, honest conversations about emotional patterns and self-understanding, please like the video, subscribe to Bookworm, and share your thoughts in the comments. It genuinely helps this channel grow. All right, let's move into the ideas behind adult children of emotionally immature parents and explore how emotional loneliness can shape a lifetime without being obvious.
Have you ever had this feeling, this deep sense of loneliness, even when you're literally surrounded by people? It's that emptiness that's so hard to put your finger on. It can stick with you from a childhood that from the outside looked totally fine, right? Maybe there was always food on the table, a roof over your head, no big, obvious trauma you can point to. And yet, that feeling of being completely alone just never went away. Well, today, we're going to dive into that unseen wound, drawing from some really insightful work by Dr. Lindsay C. Gibson, and we're finally going to give it a name. And this quote right here is where we need to start, because it is so important. This feeling, it's not just you being dramatic or overly sensitive. It is a real, fundamental pain. Dr. Gibson's work just validates what so many people feel deep down, that this inner ache is as real as a broken bone. It just doesn't show up on an X-ray. It really helps us see that emotional neglect is a genuine injury, and it's one that shapes us in really profound ways, often without us even realizing it.
So what do we actually call this feeling? I mean, to really start to get a handle on something, you have to be able to name it first. So let's start right there by giving a clear name to that sense of isolation that so many of us have been carrying around.
The term for it is emotional loneliness. And here's the most important part. This is not some personal failing on your part. It is the predictable result of not getting enough of that deep emotional connection, usually starting with parents who are for whatever reason emotionally unavailable. You see, it's about a lack of intimacy, not a lack of people. You can be in a packed stadium, at a family holiday, or even in a long-term relationship and still feel that deep, hollowing emptiness if that validating emotional connection just isn't there.
And you have to remember, as a child, you don't have the words for this stuff. You can't turn to your mom and say, I'm experiencing a deficit of emotional attunement. You just feel it. It's this gut feeling, this hollow space inside, and a sense that you're just on your own in the world, even if the house is full of people. Kids are brilliant observers, but they're terrible interpreters. They feel the disconnect, but they automatically assume it must be their fault. They take it all inward and think, something must be wrong with me.
Rhonda's story is just a perfect, heartbreaking example of this. She was right there with her family during a big, stressful event. Moving houses. Physically, she was present, but emotionally, she was on an island. No one asked her how she felt, if she was scared, what this was like for her, and for her to realize, at just 7 years old, that it was on her to cope with it all alone. That shows you just how early this loneliness can start, and how a child learns to just wall off their own feelings to survive.
So if emotional loneliness is the feeling, then what's the source? This is where we need to talk about the idea of the emotionally immature parent. And I really want to stress this. We're doing this to build understanding, not to place blame. This is about spotting a pattern, not pointing fingers.
This is so key. Emotional immaturity isn't about being a bad person or an unloving parent. It's a developmental limitation. Think of it like a capped-out capacity for emotional depth. These are often parents who are actually afraid of deep feelings, their own and especially yours. To them, emotions feel messy, unpredictable, and kind of dangerous, and that internal fear makes true back-and-forth connection almost impossible for them.
You know, these traits aren't just a random list. They create a whole pattern. It starts with that deep fear of real emotion. That means they can't handle their child's big feelings because they can't even handle their own. This makes them really self-preoccupied, not because they're selfish in a mean way, but because all their energy is going into managing their own internal world. And when you're that focused inward, there's just no room left for empathy, which of course makes them seem emotionally insensitive. And because looking at themselves would mean facing all those uncomfortable feelings, they'd rather just resist reality, which is why they so rarely apologize. It all creates this environment of emotional unreliability for a child.
Okay, let's just look at this comparison to make it really concrete. So imagine a kid comes home from school totally upset about something. The emotionally mature parent, they lean in. They might say, "Oh, honey, tell me what happened." And they offer comfort. Their whole presence sends the message, your feelings are okay, and I'm here with you. Now, the emotionally immature parent, that same distress from the child makes them feel anxious. So they pull away. They might get angry, stop all that crying, or just dismiss it. Oh, you're fine. The message the child gets is completely different, and it's so damaging. It's, your feelings are a problem, and you need to deal with them by yourself. So what does a child do in an environment like that? Well, they adapt. They have to. And this is so important. These aren't flaws or personality defects. They are incredibly intelligent, logical survival strategies that kids develop, often without even realizing it, just to get some kind of connection in what feels like an emotional desert. This is the first and most fundamental adaptation. If you learn that your own needs and feelings get ignored, or even punished, you figure out pretty fast that the price of admission to any relationship is to focus on what the other person needs. You become the helper, the little caretaker, the really good listener. You learn to read your parents' moods and manage them. You basically become the kid who never causes any trouble, because that's the role that gets you a little bit of positive attention, or at the very least, helps you avoid the negative kind. Now, from this point, two main coping styles tend to emerge. You have the externalizer. They act out. Their pain is visible through their behavior because they're trying to get a reaction, any reaction, from the world around them. But then you have the internalizer. They turn all of that focus inward. They become hyper-attuned to other people, incredibly sensitive, and they start to believe that it's up to them to fix everything. They become amazing problem solvers and super responsible because they learned so early on that if anything is going to get better, they're the one who's going to have to do it.
And just to cope with this reality, the child creates what Dr. Gibson calls a healing fantasy. It's this subconscious hope, this story they tell themselves that if they can just be good enough, or smart enough, or helpful enough, if they can just find the perfect combination of words or actions, then one day their parent will finally change. They'll see them, they'll understand them, and they'll give them that emotional connection they've been craving their whole life. It's a really powerful story of hope that keeps them moving forward.
Okay, so how does all of this actually play out when we become adults? Because these childhood strategies, they don't just magically disappear. They harden. They become these deeply ingrained patterns, almost like a relational blueprint that we carry with us into our jobs, our friendships, and especially our romantic relationships. So here's a question for you to just sit with for a second. Do you feel like you're always the one doing the emotional heavy lifting in your relationships? Are you always the one tuning into the other person's feelings, smoothing things over, anticipating their needs just to keep the connection going? Do you feel like you're the emotional manager? If you answered yes to that, it's not because you're a doormat or just too nice. It is a completely logical echo of that childhood survival strategy. Internalizers learned that their role in the family was to be the emotional caretaker. It was how they felt safe and connected. So, of course, they carry that exact same role right into their adult relationships, and they often end up attracting partners who are pretty comfortable being on the receiving end, and so the cycle just continues. All right, let's try another one. How does it feel for you to ask for support? When you need something, is there a sense of guilt? Do you feel like you're being a burden? Is there this immediate impulse to apologize for having needs in the first place? Does it just feel easier, and honestly safer, to do it all yourself? This is such a critical point. What our culture sometimes praises as hyper-independence or being so strong, it isn't just a personality trait. It can be a direct result of learning at a very young age that your needs are not going to be met, or worse, that they'll be punished. It's a trauma response. You learned to rely only on yourself because you had to. It was the only way to guarantee that you wouldn't be let down again. And these patterns, they have real, heavy consequences in our lives. The constant people-pleasing and doing all the emotional work leads to total burnout and exhaustion. That hyper-independence makes true vulnerability feel absolutely terrifying because letting your guard down when you were little was actually dangerous. And maybe the most tragic part is that you might find yourself unconsciously drawn to partners who are also self-involved, which just recreates that same familiar one-sided dynamic and reinforces that deep core childhood feeling of being completely and utterly unseen.
So where does all this leave us? I know this can feel heavy, but this brings us to our last and, honestly, our most important section. Because understanding all these patterns isn't about being stuck in the past or assigning blame. It's about finding freedom right here in the present.
This right here is the most critical shift in perspective you can make. This work is not an exercise in blaming your parents. It's an exercise in understanding them. It's about seeing them not as these malicious people who intentionally withheld love, but as people with real, profound limitations. And when you can see that, you can start to grieve what you didn't get, and you can finally stop waiting for something that they are simply incapable of giving you.
And this is the real power of awareness. When you truly get the why, that it was about their limitations, not your worthiness, that huge, heavy burden of self-blame just starts to lift. You can finally stop that little voice in your head that says, "What's wrong with me?" And you can replace it with a much kinder, more compassionate truth. I was a child in a very difficult situation, and I did what I had to do to survive.
And so, I want to end with this question, just for you to carry with you. After a whole lifetime of making sure everyone else is okay, of doing all the emotional work for everybody else, of putting your own needs and feelings at the very bottom of the list, what would it actually feel like to make your own emotional well-being the priority? That awareness we've been talking about, that's the very first step toward finding out.
Welcome back. If this book resonated with you, it's likely because it didn't describe dramatic memories. It described patterns, patterns of emotional distance, self-reliance, learning to manage things alone. One of the most important things this book makes clear is that emotional immaturity in parents isn't about intent, it's about capacity. Many caregivers simply didn't know how to respond emotionally. They avoided feelings, they minimized them, they redirected instead of connecting. Children notice that quickly, and instead of protesting, many adapt by becoming less emotionally expressive, more contained, more independent, more self-sufficient. That adaptation deserves respect. It helped you survive and function. But it can also leave you feeling unseen, guarded, or unsure how to rely on others later in life. This book isn't asking you to confront anyone or rewrite your past. It's offering understanding. And sometimes understanding alone brings relief. You're not distant because something is wrong with you. You learned distance because it was safer. If this video helped you see yourself with a little more clarity and less self-blame, please like the video and subscribe to Bookworm. And if you feel comfortable, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What part of this felt familiar? Thank you for giving yourself the space to reflect. Take what resonated, leave what didn't, and move gently forward. I'll see you in the next one.